what we try and collect while we're out is we want to estimate or count the total number of sharks. We'll swim in the water with them to get the photo ID, picture of the left side behind the gills, dive down, look at their sex, deploy satellite tags if we have them, collect DNA samples, and also collect a plankton sample to see what they're feeding on. So here's a picture. Dr. Hoffmeyer is going to go deploy the satellite tag, and then I have the spear pole and we get the DNA tip. That has a special tip where it goes in and just takes a little plug of tissue. In 2010, we had Dr. Sylvia Earle come out with us. Now, if you don't know who she is, I would look her up on Wikipedia. She's a really great, one of the leading female scientists. She came out and wanted to help look at what was going on with whale sharks in response to the oil spill. And we encountered this group of over 100 animals. Now, I was in the plane that day, and I'll show you some pictures that I took. But in one area, in probably about 1 square mile area, there was more than 100, maybe 150 sharks. Unfortunately, we only had 4 satellite tags with us that day because they're expensive, so they're hard to come by. But we were able to add 26 unique animals into the Cochin photo identification library. So now for those 26 animals that we encountered on that day, if they're seen anywhere else in the world and someone captures a photo of it, we'll know those movements. So that's pretty exciting. 10 DNA samples and then also, egg collections. So here's that photo I was talking about that I took from the plane. And I added little circles here so you can see where the whale sharks were. And, in the plane we circled the area where they were to estimate, how dense they were. And it was definitely only about 1 square mile, and they just, kept cruising around until all the food was gone. You can't really see it in this picture, but there's areas where it really looked like cloudy patches of eggs. You can almost see it from the plane, so that was pretty neat. We had some professional underwater photographers on the boat that day, so this is one of his photos. This photo was taken by Sylvia Earle, and, it was lucky that it was such a flat, calm day. You could actually see all the fish eggs right there at the surface of the water, so it's kind of a cool photo. So, what's on the menu? What were those eggs? What's attracting them? Well, after genetic identification, determined that it was predominantly little tunny, which is also called bonita. It's this little fish here being held by Jim Franks. And we, if you look at just the amount of eggs, we took a plankton sample, where they were feeding, and then a control site about 2 miles away, and 300-fold more fish eggs. So they really were isolating that area where the eggs were the densest. So, but despite this work, there's still some really important questions that remain unanswered, and that we have no idea how important these sort of localized events are, how frequently they might occur. And then we have no idea why or how whale sharks know to go, how hundreds of animals know to show up at this 1 mile square location. It could be sense of smell, could be some sort of auditory cue, chemical cue, or maybe they, it just happens at a predictable time or predictable conditions year after year. So one of the mysteries that scientists all over the world are still trying to figure out. A little bit about the satellite tags that we deploy. There's 2 here. This is called a spot tag. It's a surface positioning tag. So this gets towed behind the animal, and when it comes to the surface, if the satellite's overhead, it'll actually transmit a GPS signal. So we'll get an email, and we'll know exactly where that animal is at that time. Now, unfortunately, it does look like a fishing lure, kind of, so if they don't stay on that long, there's a lot of predation on these, or we think that's what's causing them to fall off and not stay on as long as they're supposed to. Also, so this here is a PAT tag. It's an archival tag, so it actually stays really flush with the body and will just archive temperature, depth, and light levels, which will help us figure out a location. And then at a pre-programmed time, it'll pop off, transmit the data via satellite, and we'll get it. We'll be able to analyze that data afterwards. And that's, of course, hoping it stays on for the full duration of time and downloads all the data to us. And here's Dr. Hoffmeyer going down to deploy one of those tags. So just a little preliminary data from some of the tags that we have collected over the years. 2008, we tagged a whale shark near that the Sackett Bank location. Unfortunately, problems happened internally with the tag, so we didn't get everything that happened in between those dates. But we know that it tagged here. It popped off here almost 300 miles south And the reason it popped off is because the animal went over a mile deep. And the tags are programmed that if they go too deep, it pops off so that the tag doesn't implode. So at the time, that was the deepest a whale shark had ever been recorded diving to. In 2009, we tagged a couple sharks near the Ewing Bank location, and when they popped off, one was way over by Florida, and the other looked like it was headed towards Texas or Mexico. Now, we thought that maybe this animal here was just kind of hanging around the same general area. I mean, that's not too far of a distance. But when we analyzed the data, we had a couple more tags that we deployed, but never reported, so we don't know where they went. But when we analyzed the data a little further, we see that the animal that we kind of we thought stayed in the same area actually did a full loop around the western edge of the Gulf of Mexico and then came back up. So that was pretty interesting. And now in 2010, we were able to deploy 2 satellite tags near that Ewing Bank location. One we are calling Samson, and that one actually Sylvia Earle dubbed it that name because it was such a large shark, and kind of did this weird little loop here. The other we call Jeff because we had celebrity Jeff Corwin helping us that day, which featured our research on the news, so that was pretty exciting, and got a cool photo of him and Dr. Hoffmeyer. What was interesting, though, is that both of these tags popped off in the same general area, so we're hoping at some point to get to investigate this area a little bit and find out what's going on over there. So this is what some of the archival data looks like when you get it back. This is the depth profile. This is only just a couple days. The nighttime is shaded in gray here, so you can see when the animal was tagged, it was surface feeding, which is when we encountered it, and it stayed at the surface for pretty much the rest of the day. And then starting about dusk, it started doing this diving behavior, which is pretty common for whale sharks. It's been well documented in the literature that they do this diving behavior, which is probably associated with resting. And then had we gone out the very next day, we might not have seen them. They didn't spend a whole lot of time at the surface. But sometime at dawn on the second day, something happened that slowly caused the whale sharks to rise to the surface and then remain at the surface feeding again. So since Bonita are multiple batch spawners, it's possible that, on this evening, a spawning event might have occurred, and then the whale shark just might have followed those eggs as they started to float up to the surface. So in the future, we're going to continue monitoring whale shark abundance and distribution with our online sighting survey as well as aerial surveys. We do have some more satellite tags that we'll hope to deploy at the aggregation location this summer, as well as we want to get involved with a group called Marine Meganet, who is deploying acoustic receivers all throughout the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean. And so then if you put out acoustic tags on sharks, when they pass by these receivers, we'll know their movements that way as well. And then using remote sensing data and our sighting survey data, we can run some species distribution modeling, kind of predict where the suitable habitat is in the northern Gulf of Mexico. And that's what I did as my master's work. And then I'd really like to continue that over the years. So here's just a couple example maps of what those habitat suitability maps look like. So taking all of the sightings data and then a bunch of remote sensing variables, which we thought would be important. And so we can see just between 2008 and 2009, there's quite a bit of difference. There's, suitable habitat might shift over the years. But just between 2 years, it's hard to make any distinct, to notice any distinct patterns. So if we continue to do this over, all the years of our study, maybe over time, we'll really see some important trends. And if you want to stay tuned and find out more details or updates, we have our website at the GCR webpage, /whale shark research, or whale shark. And then we also have a Facebook page, so we'll sometimes post updates when we're going out on boats, or if we've tagged a shark, we'll list that on there. So if you want to keep up, you can become a fan of our work on Facebook. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I don't know if you covered it, but do you know the lifespan?
Based on the same age and growth studies where they determined that whale sharks are probably about 30 years when they're sexually mature, they estimated that they could probably live to about 80 as well.
The fishermen, they always look for the cobia and they're around them, but I don't guess anybody ever really, reels in.
No,
that's so big.
Right, yeah.
Are they when they're little?
I have heard one story about someone saying their hook might have gotten caught on the shark, but then, popped the line. They definitely didn't reel it in. But whale sharks aren't, biting on the bait. It was probably just, an accidental hook thing.
But people catch regular sharks all the time. You think you could catch one that is young when they're
Well,
really small?
and that's why it's a mystery. We really have no idea where the small ones are. They might just stay really deep for protection because they are small and they don't have, any real defense mechanisms except for their large size. So when they're small, they're pretty, vulnerable. Yeah, they're gonna hide. Small whale sharks have been documented in the stomachs of a blue marlin or a blue shark, and so, they do get preyed upon by larger species when they are that small. So they definitely, have to do something to protect themselves. So hiding out makes sense.
Cool. Have you been in the water with them?
Yeah, did you see the picture? Yeah, they're really amazing creatures. They're big, and they look like they're going slow, but trying to swim next to one is quite a feat. Usually what we do when we're trying to tag is we'll have the boat drop us off in the water a little bit in front of the shark, so that way it's, in its path. So as it comes by, we'll pop the tag in or get the photograph or get the DNA sample, and sometimes it takes several jumps. We'll have to swim back to the boat, jump on, catch up to the shark, jump in, do whatever, get the next piece of data, and then, back on the boat, swim again. So I get my exercise on those days, that's for sure. But it's pretty exciting. I think the adrenaline helps with all that swimming. Any other questions? No? Thank you for coming out.